Felix finally breaks his silence when everyone blames Hyunjin, revealing painful secrets, hidden wounds, and emotions no one expected. The practice room door slammed against the wall so hard the mirrors trembled. "Why do you always blame Hyunjin?" Felix's voice cracked through the room like shattered glass. For a second, nobody moved. Not Bang-chan, not Lino, not even Hyunjin himself. Rain hammered against the building windows, while the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, turning the entire room cold and pale. The air smelled like sweat, dust, and the burnt bitterness of coffee left untouched for hours. Hyunjin stood near the corner with his head lowered, breathing unevenly. His black hoodie sleeves covered half his trembling hands. He looked exhausted in a way that went beyond lack of sleep, like someone who had been carrying stones inside his chest for too long. And everyone had noticed, everyone except the people accusing him. "You think shouting will fix this?" Lino snapped, crossing his arms tightly. "Schedules are ruined, interviews are awkward, and he disappeared without telling anyone," turned sharply. His freckles looked pale under the harsh lights, but his eyes burned fiercely. "You don't know why he disappeared?" "Then tell us," Changbin muttered. Silence swallowed the room again. Hyunjin slowly lifted his head, panic flickering across his face. Almost instantly, Felix noticed it. He always noticed. The tiny twitch in Hyunjin's jaw. The way his fingers curled when anxiety attacked him. The slight shake in his breathing before he forced himself to smile. Felix knew all of it, because for months Hyunjin had been breaking apart where nobody could see. And Felix had watched it happen alone. Bang-chan stepped forward carefully. "Felix, what's going on?" Felix swallowed hard. His chest tightened painfully as memories flashed behind his eyes. Hyunjin vomiting quietly in the bathroom after reading hateful comments. Hyunjin sitting alone in darkness at 3 a.m. because he couldn't sleep without nightmares. Hyunjin staring at his reflection and whispering, "Maybe they'd be happier without me," had heard those words, and they had terrified him ever since. "You all think he's difficult," Felix said softly, voice trembling now. "But none of you asked why he changed." The rain outside intensified violently. Thunder rolled across the sky like distant explosions. Hyunjin looked away immediately, unable to face anyone. That hurt Felix the most, because Hyunjin used to laugh loudly, used to dance around the dorm kitchen at midnight, used to cling to the members like warmth itself. But lately he moved through life like a ghost pretending to be alive, and nobody stopped to ask if he was okay. "He's hurting," Felix whispered. Changbin frowned. "We're all hurting, Felix." "No," Felix shook his head immediately. "Not like him." A dangerous silence filled the room. Hyunjin suddenly stepped back. "Stop." Felix ignored him. "No one saw him crying after the Osaka concert," Felix continued. "No one saw him shaking before going on stage because he thought people hated him again," Hyunjin said more firmly. "You didn't see him reading comments for hours until he couldn't breathe properly." "Felix." The shout echoed harshly. Everyone froze. Hyunjin's eyes were glossy now, red around the edges. His composure was finally cracking apart. "I told you not to say anything." Stared at him helplessly for a moment. Hyunjin looked angry. Then the anger disappeared, revealing something far worse beneath it. Fear, raw, suffocating fear, the kind that came from someone terrified of becoming a burden. Hyunjin laughed weakly and rubbed his face roughly. "Great. Now everyone thinks I'm pathetic too." "No one thinks that," Bang-chan said immediately. But Hyunjin only smiled bitterly. "Yes, they do." The room felt colder. Felix hated that smile more than anything. Hyunjin always smiled like that when he was giving up. Slowly, Hyunjin walked toward the mirrors. His reflection multiplied endlessly around him. Tired eyes, pale skin, shoulders heavy with invisible scars. "I know I've caused problems lately," he murmured. "I know I'm hard to deal with." "You're not. I am." Voice became dangerously calm. "That's why people leave eventually." Felix's heart dropped. Because Hyunjin wasn't talking only about the members. He was talking about his past, about the friends who abandoned him during trainee years, about the endless criticism, about the loneliness he buried under perfection. Hyunjin had spent years believing love was conditional, that people stayed only when he was useful, only when he smiled correctly, only when he performed perfectly. The second he struggled, he expected everyone to disappear, and maybe that was why he pushed people away first. Tired, Hyunjin whispered. Nobody knew how to answer. Even Lee No's expression softened slightly. Felix walked closer carefully, as if approaching someone standing near the edge of a collapsing building. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. Hyunjin's eyes flickered. For a second he looked young again. Fragile, exhausted. Human. Then he laughed softly. I always do. The words destroyed something inside Felix because they were true. Hyunjin always carried everything alone, the pressure, the guilt, the hate, the fear. Even now, while his hands trembled violently, he was still trying not to inconvenience anyone. Bang Chan finally stepped forward and placed a hand on Hyunjin's shoulder. You should have told us. Hyunjin looked down instantly. I didn't want to become everyone's problem. Your family, Chan replied quietly. That almost broke him. Felix saw it immediately in the way Hyunjin's lips pressed together tightly, in the way his breathing suddenly became uneven again. Hyunjin turned away quickly before anyone could see tears falling down his face. But Felix saw them anyway. He always did. The rain slowly softened outside. Inside the practice room, nobody spoke for a long time. The tension from earlier had transformed into something heavier. Regret, guilt, realization. Finally, Lee No sighed quietly. You idiot, he muttered softly toward Hyunjin. You really thought we hated you? Hyunjin smiled faintly without turning around. I didn't know what to think anymore. Lowered his gaze. That answer hurt everyone, because deep down they realized they had missed the signs, the exhaustion, the silence, the fake smiles, the disappearing acts. Hyunjin had been drowning right beside them, and they almost didn't notice until Felix screamed the truth into the room. Later that night, the dorm became unusually quiet. The city lights outside blurred through rain-covered windows while distant traffic hummed softly below. The members slowly retreated into their rooms one by one, carrying heavy thoughts with them. Felix found Hyunjin sitting alone on the balcony wrapped in a blanket. Cold wind brushed through his blonde hair. You'll get sick, Felix murmured. Hyunjin smiled weakly without looking at him. Couldn't sleep. Sat beside him quietly for several minutes. Neither spoke. The silence between them felt familiar, comfortable, sad. Then Hyunjin suddenly asked, Why did you defend me like that? Felix looked at him immediately. Because someone had to. Hyunjin's eyes glistened faintly under the city lights. He whispered, You stayed. Felt his chest ache, because he finally understood. Hyunjin wasn't afraid of hate anymore. He was afraid of being abandoned once people saw how broken he truly was. And maybe that fear had controlled him for years. Felix slowly pulled the blanket tighter around Hyunjin's shoulders. The next morning, the dorm felt unnaturally quiet, not peaceful, heavy. Like the walls themselves remembered everything that had been said the night before. Felix woke before sunrise, unable to sleep properly. The faint gray light creeping through the curtains painted the room in cold shadows. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed softly, mixing with the distant sound of rainwater dripping from rooftops outside. He rubbed his tired eyes and sat up slowly. Hyunjin's bed was empty. Instant panic tightened inside his chest. Felix immediately stood and walked out into the hallway barefoot, his heartbeat growing louder with every second. The dorm was silent except for the soft creaking of wooden floors beneath his steps. Then he noticed light coming from the practice room downstairs. Relief mixed with worry. Of course, Hyunjin was there. He always ran toward exhaustion whenever his thoughts became too loud. Felix opened the practice room door carefully. Music echoed softly through the dark space. Hyunjin stood alone in front of the mirrors, completely drenched in sweat despite the early hour. His movements were sharp, almost violent, every dance step filled with frustration instead of rhythm. The mirrors reflected him endlessly, 1 Hyunjin, 10 Hyunjins. 100 exhausted versions of the same person trying desperately to be enough. Felix watched quietly from the doorway. Something about the scene hurt to look at. Because Hyunjin danced like someone trying to outrun himself. The music suddenly stopped. Hyunjin leaned forward heavily, gripping his knees as he struggled to breathe. Sweat dripped onto the wooden floor while strands of wet hair stuck to his forehead. You should rest. Hyunjin froze immediately. Then he sighed without turning around. You scared me. Stepped closer carefully. You disappeared again. I couldn't sleep. You didn't even try. A weak laugh escaped Hyunjin's lips. Felix finally noticed the dark circles under his eyes more clearly now. They looked worse than yesterday. His hands trembled faintly from exhaustion. "How long have you been here?" Hyunjin shrugged. "That means too long." For a moment, neither spoke. The practice room smelled like sweat and dust and cold air from the broken ventilation system overhead. Outside the windows, the city slowly awakened beneath cloudy skies. Hyunjin stared at his reflection silently. "I hate this place sometimes." Frowned slightly. The practice room, the mirrors. Voice came out hollow. Felix followed his gaze toward the endless reflections. "I look tired all the time now," Hyunjin whispered. "Even when I smile." Felix's chest tightened painfully again. Hyunjin always noticed every flaw in himself, every tired expression, every mistake, every weakness. It was like his mind constantly searched for reasons to hate himself before anyone else could. "You're being too hard on yourself." "That's easy for you to say." Blinked. Hyunjin finally turned around slowly. "You don't understand what it's like." Words weren't cruel, but they were honest. And honesty sometimes hurt more. Felix looked down briefly. Maybe Hyunjin was right. Felix didn't know what it felt like to wake up every morning terrified of disappointing everyone around him. He didn't know what it felt like to carry impossible expectations until they crushed the air from his lungs. But he did know one thing. You don't have to survive it alone. Hyunjin looked away instantly. That sentence always affected him, because deep down, Hyunjin still didn't believe people stayed willingly. Suddenly, the practice room door opened again. Bang Chan entered holding 2 paper coffee cups, stopping briefly when he noticed them both. "You're both awake already." Felix gave him a tired smile. Hyunjin immediately straightened himself, forcing his expression blank again. Felix noticed it instantly, the emotional walls sliding back into place. Chan noticed too, but he pretended not to. "I figured I'd find at least one of you here," Chan said lightly, placing the drinks near the speakers. Hyunjin muttered a quiet thanks. The atmosphere became awkward again. Yesterday's confrontation still lingered heavily between all of them. Finally, Chan leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. "We canceled today's schedule." Hyunjin's head snapped up immediately. "What? You need rest." "Fine. You almost collapsed during rehearsal yesterday. That's different." "No, it isn't." Hyunjin's jaw tightened. Felix recognized that expression immediately, the stubbornness Hyunjin used whenever he felt cornered. "I don't want special treatment," Chan sighed softly. "This isn't punishment, Hyunjin." "Then stop treating me like I'm broken." The room fell silent. Hyunjin looked shocked right after saying it, like even he hadn't meant for the words to come out so sharply. Chan remained calm, but Felix noticed the sadness flicker across his face. "We're worried about you," Chan said quietly. Hyunjin laughed bitterly and rubbed the back of his neck. "That's worse." Felix frowned. "Why would that be worse?" Hyunjin looked toward the floor. "Because people get tired eventually." Honesty in his voice hurt more than shouting ever could. Chan slowly sat down on the floor nearby. "Who made you believe that?" Hyunjin didn't answer. But silence itself became the answer. Years of pressure, years of criticism, years of learning that mistakes brought disappointment faster than comfort. Felix suddenly remembered something from months ago, a night after a concert overseas. Hyunjin sitting alone in the hotel bathroom with bloodshot eyes after reading thousands of hateful comments online. Felix had found him there at nearly 4 in the morning. "You should sleep," Felix had whispered back then. Hyunjin smiled weakly without looking up from his phone. Right though, never forgot those words, because no matter how much love surrounded Hyunjin, the hate always seemed louder inside his own mind. Back in the practice room, Chan spoke again. "You know what I think?" Hyunjin stayed silent. "I think you've been trying to earn love for too long." The room became still. Even Felix stopped breathing for a second, because Chan had said exactly what Hyunjin feared most. Hyunjin's eyes slowly lowered. "You don't understand." "Then explain it to us." A painful smile appeared on Hyunjin's face. "I wouldn't even know where to start." His voice sounded exhausted now, fragile. Felix moved closer quietly until their shoulders almost touched. "You can start with the truth." Hyunjin closed his eyes. For several long seconds, only the faint hum of electricity filled the room. Then finally, scared all the time. Confession barely came out above a whisper, but it shattered something invisible between them. Hyunjin's breathing became shaky. "I'm scared people will get disappointed again. I'm scared I'll ruin things. I'm scared one mistake will make everyone leave." Felt tears sting behind his eyes. because Hyunjin looked genuinely terrified admitting it, like vulnerability itself was dangerous. Chan's expression softened completely. Nobody's leaving you. Hyunjin laughed quietly. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. Hyunjin finally looked at him then, and for the first time Felix saw something different inside Hyunjin's eyes, not confidence, not happiness, hope, small and fragile, but finally there. The rain outside had completely stopped now. Sunlight slowly pushed through the clouds, spilling pale gold across the practice room floor. Hyunjin noticed it too. For a brief moment the light reflected softly against his face, warming the exhaustion carved beneath his eyes. Felix smiled faintly. You should eat something. Hyunjin groaned immediately. I knew you'd say that, because you skipped dinner yesterday. I wasn't hungry. Never hungry lately. Hyunjin looked away guiltily. Chan suddenly stood up and stretched. Well, good news. Lee No made breakfast. Blinked in surprise. Wait, voluntarily. That's exactly why I'm warning you first. For the first time in days, a real laugh escaped Hyunjin, soft, small, but real, and hearing it made Felix feel like maybe things could still heal after all. You're not alone anymore, he said quietly. Hyunjin closed his eyes. For the first time in months, his breathing sounded calm. And although the wounds inside him hadn't disappeared, the loneliness surrounding his heart finally began to crack apart under the warmth of someone who refused to leave.
The smell of burnt toast hit them before they even reached the kitchen. Felix burst out laughing instantly. Oh no, I told you, Bang Chan sighed dramatically. Inside the kitchen, smoke floated dangerously near the ceiling while Lino stood beside the stove looking deeply offended by the existence of cooking itself. Changbin sat at the counter laughing so hard he nearly spilled his drink, and Xiumin had all the windows open despite the cold morning air. I followed the instructions exactly, Lino argued. You almost started a fire exactly, Xiumin replied. Hyunjin stopped near the doorway quietly. For a moment nobody noticed him, and Felix watched something complicated cross Hyunjin's face, warmth, sadness, disbelief, like he had forgotten what normal felt like. Then Changbin looked up. Oh, the ghost finally returned. Hyunjin rolled his eyes weakly. Good morning to you too. Changbin stood immediately and shoved a plate toward him anyway. Sit down before Felix cries again. I did not cry. Absolutely cried. Glared while everyone laughed softly. The tension from yesterday still existed, but it no longer felt sharp enough to cut through the room. Something had shifted overnight. Not perfectly, not magically, but enough. Enough for Hyunjin to sit down beside them instead of isolating himself upstairs. Enough for Chan to stop watching him every second with hidden panic. Enough for Felix to breathe a little easier. Hyunjin stared down at the food silently for a moment. Eggs. Toast. Fruit cut unevenly by someone clearly impatient. Simple, normal. His chest tightened unexpectedly, because lately he had forgotten how comforting normal things could be. You're staring at the eggs like they insulted your family, Xiumin said dryly. Hyunjin blinked before snorting quietly. Felix smiled without realizing it. There it was again. That laugh. Tiny pieces of the old Hyunjin slowly resurfacing through the cracks. But then Hyunjin's phone buzzed against the table. Everything changed instantly. Felix noticed it immediately. The way Hyunjin froze, the way the color drained subtly from his face, the way his shoulders stiffened before he even looked at the screen. Fear, pure instinctive fear. Hyunjin grabbed the phone quickly and turned the screen off before anyone else could see it. Too quickly. Chan narrowed his eyes slightly. You okay? Yeah. Felix knew it immediately. Hyunjin stood abruptly. I'm going upstairs for a second. Just like that, the warmth disappeared again. The members exchanged quiet glances as Hyunjin left. Nobody spoke until the sound of his bedroom door shutting echoed faintly above them. Changbin frowned. Something's wrong. Stared toward the hallway silently. Deep down, he already knew, because Hyunjin only looked that terrified when the outside world reached him again. Social media, articles, comments. The things he pretended didn't hurt him anymore. Felix stood immediately. I'll check on him. Chan nodded quietly. The hallway upstairs felt colder than before. Felix approached Hyunjin's door carefully and knocked once, no answer. Hyunjin. Silence. Felix slowly opened the door. Hyunjin sat on the floor beside his bed with his phone clenched tightly in his hand. Sunlight spilled through the curtains, but it did nothing to warm the room. Felix's stomach dropped when he noticed tears gathering silently in Hyunjin's eyes. Hey. Hyunjin wiped his face quickly. I'm fine. Lie. Felix walked closer carefully. What happened? Hyunjin hesitated, then finally handed him the phone. Felix looked down. An article headline filled the screen. Fans criticize Hyunjin's recent behavior during promotions. Below it were thousands of comments, some angry, some cruel, some questioning whether Hyunjin even cared about the group anymore. Felix felt rage burn instantly inside his chest, but Hyunjin looked numb, and somehow that was worse. "I shouldn't have looked," Hyunjin whispered. Felix immediately locked the phone and set it aside. "Stop reading those." "What if they're right?" "They're not. You don't know that," frowned sharply. "Yes, I do." Hyunjin laughed bitterly and leaned his head back against the bed frame. "You know what the funny part is?" Felix stayed quiet. "I can handle strangers hatting me." His voice trembled slightly now. "But the second I think I'm disappointing you guys, I can't breathe." Felix's chest ached painfully. Hyunjin looked exhausted again, not physically this time. Emotionally, like every hateful word had carved itself directly into his skin, Felix slowly sat beside him on the floor. "When did you start believing you had to be perfect all the time?" Hyunjin stared toward the ceiling silently. Then finally, "When people only noticed me after I became useful." Answer hit harder than Felix expected. Hyunjin smiled faintly, but there was no happiness in it. "Back then, if I danced well, people stayed." His fingers tightened slightly around the blanket beside him. "If I made mistakes, people disappeared." Listened quietly. "I guess eventually." Hyunjin swallowed hard. "I stopped believing anyone would stay if they saw the worst parts of me." The room felt painfully small suddenly. Felix understood now why Hyunjin hid everything, why he smiled through panic attacks, why he isolated himself whenever things became difficult, why asking for help looked almost impossible for him. Because somewhere in his heart, Hyunjin believed struggle made him unlovable. Felix turned toward him fully. "You know what your problem is?" Hyunjin blinked slightly. "You think people love you because you perform well." Hyunjin looked away immediately. "But that's not true." Felix's voice softened. "We love you because you're you." Hyunjin's expression cracked slightly. Felix continued before he could interrupt. "You're annoying sometimes." Hyunjin scoffed weakly. "You leave clothes everywhere." Rude. "You steal everyone's snacks." "I do not." "You absolutely do." A tiny smile appeared despite everything. Felix smiled too. "But even on your worst days," he whispered, "we still want you here." Filled the room again, heavy, emotional, real. Hyunjin looked down at his trembling hands. Nobody had ever said things like this to him so directly before, not without conditions attached, not without expectations hidden underneath. Felix noticed tears slipping quietly down Hyunjin's face again. But this time, Hyunjin didn't hide them. "I'm trying," he whispered brokenly. Felix's eyes immediately stung. "I know. I really am. I know." Hyunjin covered his eyes with one hand shakily. "I'm so tired, Felix." The confession shattered something inside the room, not dramatic, not loud, just devastatingly honest. Felix moved without thinking and pulled Hyunjin into a tight hug. At first, Hyunjin froze completely. Then suddenly, he broke. His body shook violently as years of buried exhaustion finally poured out all at once. Silent sobs wrecked through him, while he clutched Felix's hoodie tightly like someone terrified of falling apart completely. Felix held him harder. "It's okay," he whispered repeatedly. And for the first time in a very long time, Hyunjin allowed someone to see how badly he was hurting without trying to hide it behind a smile. Hyunjin cried until his breathing turned uneven from exhaustion, not the quiet, controlled tears Felix was used to seeing. These were different, messier, heavier, years of pressure collapsing all at once. Felix stayed still, holding him carefully while the morning sunlight slowly shifted across the floorboards. Outside, the city continued moving as if nothing had happened, cars passing, distant sirens echoing faintly, people beginning ordinary days. But inside the room, something important was changing. Hyunjin had spent so long pretending he was okay that even breaking down felt unfamiliar to him. "I'm sorry," he whispered suddenly between shaky breaths. Felix frowned immediately. "Why are you apologizing? I didn't mean to become this." Hyunjin pulled back slightly, eyes red and exhausted. "A problem." Felt anger flare again, not toward Hyunjin, toward every person and every moment that made him believe pain automatically made him a burden. "You really need to stop saying that." Hyunjin laughed weakly and wiped his face roughly. "I'm trying." Softened instantly, because he could hear the honesty behind those words. Hyunjin wasn't refusing help anymore. He genuinely just didn't know how to believe he deserved it. A quiet knock interrupted them. The door opened carefully before either could answer, and Sumin peeked inside holding 2 mugs. "I come bearing hot chocolate," he announced calmly. Because apparently everyone in this dorm is emotionally unstable today. Hyunjin snorted unexpectedly. Seungmin paused dramatically. Oh good, he still remembers how to laugh. Barely, Hyunjin muttered hoarsely. Seungmin entered and handed them the mugs before sitting cross-legged near the bed. For a moment, silence settled comfortably between them, not awkward, not tense, just quiet. Hyunjin held the warm mug carefully between his hands. Felix noticed how the heat seemed to ground him slightly, pulling him back from wherever his thoughts had dragged him earlier. Seungmin glanced toward the forgotten phone near the pillow. You read comments again. Hyunjin grimaced slightly. That obvious? You looked like you saw a ghost downstairs. Leaned back against the bed frame. You should delete those apps for a while. Hyunjin looked down. I know, but none of them missed the hesitation in his voice, because despite how much the comments hurt him, Hyunjin still searched through them endlessly. Like some part of him needed proof that his fears were real. Why do you keep reading things that destroy you? Felix asked quietly. Hyunjin stared into the steam rising from his drink. Because sometimes I think if I understand why people hate me, he swallowed hard. Maybe I can fix myself enough to make it stop. The room became silent again. Seungmin's expression softened almost painfully. That's not fixing yourself, he said gently. That's punishing yourself. Hyunjin didn't answer, because deep down, he knew Seungmin was right. The problem was that self-criticism had become so normal to him that he no longer recognized how cruel he was being toward himself. Felix suddenly remembered a night nearly a year ago. Hyunjin had practiced the same choreography until 3 a.m. because he thought one camera angle made him look lazy. Nobody else had even noticed it. But Hyunjin had nearly worked himself sick over a mistake that barely existed. Back then, Felix thought it was perfectionism. Now he realized it was fear. Fear that one flaw would make people leave. A soft, buzzing sound interrupted the silence again. Hyunjin stiffened instantly. Another notification. Felix reached for the phone first this time before Hyunjin could. Felix. No, Hyunjin blinked. Felix locked the screen firmly and placed the phone face down on the nightstand. You don't get to torture yourself today. A tiny smile tugged weakly at Hyunjin's lips. You sound scary when you care. Good. Seungmin nodded seriously. Honestly, it's terrifying. Hyunjin laughed again, softer this time, real. Felix noticed the difference immediately. The heaviness inside the room hadn't disappeared, but the sharp edges were beginning to dull little by little. Then suddenly, another voice echoed dramatically from downstairs. Who ate my pancakes? Changbin, immediately followed by Lino shouting back. They were ugly anyway. The three of them froze. Then Hyunjin burst into laughter, actual laughter, loud enough that his shoulders shook. Felix stared at him in surprise before smiling automatically. There you are. For a brief moment, Hyunjin looked lighter, still tired. Still hurting, but lighter. Even Hyunjin himself seemed surprised by it. His laughter slowly faded into silence again, but this time the silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt warm, safe. Then Seungmin stood and stretched. Well, he sighed, before Changbin commits murder downstairs, we should probably intervene. Nodded, but Hyunjin stayed seated quietly. The moment the door closed behind Seungmin, the room softened again. Hyunjin looked toward Felix slowly. Thank you. Tilted his head. For what? For staying. The simplicity of the words almost hurt more than anything else. Felix realized then how deeply abandonment had shaped Hyunjin's heart. To Hyunjin, love wasn't proven through grand speeches. It was proven through presence, through people remaining beside him after seeing the worst parts of him. Felix reached over and nudged his shoulder gently. You're stuck with us now. Hyunjin smiled faintly. That sounds threatening. It is. Small laugh. Then Hyunjin's expression slowly became thoughtful again. There's something I never told anyone. Immediately noticed the shift in his voice. Careful, fragile, Hyunjin looked down at his hands. A few months ago, he hesitated. I almost left. Stomach dropped instantly. What? I didn't tell anyone because I knew you'd panic. Hyunjin. He exhaled shakily. Everything got too loud. The pressure, the hate, my own thoughts. His fingers tightened together. I thought maybe everyone would be happier if I disappeared for a while. Felt cold all over, not because Hyunjin spoke dramatically, but because he sounded so calm while saying it, like he had truly believed it. You scared me, Felix whispered. Hyunjin looked guilty immediately. I know. No, you don't understand. Felix's voice cracked slightly. I saw how empty you looked back then, and I kept thinking if I looked away for 1 second. He stopped breathing properly for a moment. I thought I might lose you. Hyunjin's eyes widened faintly. Silence filled the room once more. Then slowly, painfully slowly, Hyunjin reached over and held Felix's hand. It was the first time he initiated contact all day. "I'm still here," he whispered. Felix looked at him quietly. Hyunjin's eyes were still tired, still wounded, but no longer distant. And maybe healing didn't happen all at once. Maybe it happened exactly like this, in quiet bedrooms, in honest conversations, in shaking hands reaching back instead of pulling away. For the first time in months, Hyunjin finally stopped carrying his pain alone. And that changed everything.